welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. Let me begin by setting the scene for this conversation. The word corridor evokes interconnection, resilience, and a new form of globalization, and maybe even a new form of diplomacy, taking shape right before our eyes. So how do we move from vision to implementation? What are the preconditions, political, financial, regulatory, for these corridors to deliver on their promise? And how can we ensure that they serve not only governments or corporates, but also ultimately people? That's the crux of the question here. So let me introduce you to our guests here. To my left is Gérard MESTRALLET. You are France's special envoy for IMEC, the new India, Middle East, and Europe Economic Corridor. Thank you for being with us. Rémy, FEKETE, you are partner at Jones Day, one of the leading experts in telecom and infrastructure law, and you advise on digital and energy corridors worldwide. Henrik, let me introduce you again, even though you were on the previous panel, of course. You are Global Head of Global Banking at Standard Chartered. So let's start with the state of play here. What are corridors today? And I'm going to turn to you, of course, Gérard MESTRALLET. So you can tell us what IMEC represents for France, but also for Europe and for the global economy, and what makes it a new generation of economic corridor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. So what is IMEC? IMEC is the result of an agreement which has been signed by 8 chiefs of states, Modi from India, MBS from Saudi Arabia, MBZ from Emirates, plus 4 European, President Macron, the German Chancellor, Mrs. Meloni, plus von der Leyen, and the US. Joe Biden. It has been signed in September 2023, 3 weeks before the 7th October, and therefore the war in Gaza, which has changed the priorities. What were the strategic objective behind the corridor? First, economic. There is the trade between India, Europe, through the Middle East, which is growing at a pace of 6 to 7%, which is relatively high, which means doubling in 10 years. So in any case, the existing infrastructures will not be sufficient during this period. Secondly, of course, there is a will from the 3 continents, India, the Arabic continent, and the European continent, to strengthen their links, and therefore to develop their political links, and not only economics. You know that India is a non-aligned or multi-aligned country, sometimes turning to the east, to China and Russia, sometimes turning to Europe. And the presence of the states in the agreement demonstrates that the US were willing to strengthen India with the Occident. There was a third objective, because in the initial agreement, even without being signatories, Jordan and Israel are mentioned. So the corridor was supposed to come from India to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, to cross by a land track the Arabic Peninsula up to Haifa in Israel. And therefore, by creating physical links between Israel and the Arab countries, there was the objective to implement the Abraham Accord, signed by Trump during his first term, with the objective to normalize the relationship between Israel and the Arab countries. So all those objectives were present at the moment of the signature. Now, of course, the war has changed a little bit the situation. Nevertheless, in the meantime, we have been working. I've been appointed I was the first a special envoy of a chief of state. Now there are several. We have already held meetings with a representative of the initial signatories. We have structured the governance, and we have working groups working in order to implement the IMEC.
And I have to ask you very, very quickly, how does it differ from China's Belt and Road Initiative?
It's not China, it's India. That's a strong difference. Secondly, the Belt and Road Initiative is centered through China. It is made, invented by China for China. It's different. This corridor is not against, it's against no one. It's another route which will be developed, offering to the market new opportunities. And by the way, it will not be a point-to-point corridor, not Mumbai to Marseille. It will be a network of corridors. There will be several ports from India, not only Mumbai, but Mundra in the north, Vadhavan, a brand new one. Several ports from the Arabic Peninsula, Dammam in Saudi Arabia. There will be Abu Dhabi, Dubai, but also some ports in Oman. To give access to the Mediterranean, there will be Haifa, but also others, like, for example, Alexandria or Port Said in Egypt, and why not Beirut in Lebanon or Tripoli. And several ports giving access to Europe, Marseille, that we are strongly supporting, of course, but also Trieste in Italy, or the ports of Greece, including Piraeus.
Thank you very much. Now, when we think about economic corridors, Rémy, we often think of physical trade routes, but of course, and you've been doing a lot of work around it, it's also about digital corridors. So how are we redefining connectivity beyond the physical trade routes, and what regulatory frameworks or cooperation mechanisms are needed to make them interoperable? Because that's the key here.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for inviting me as well. It's a pleasure to be here at Infraweek. If I may, I'd like to probably rephrase a little bit the question, because for me, there's nothing like a digital corridor. You have digital infrastructures, but a corridor is not an infrastructure. This made me think a little bit of the novel 100 Years of Solitude. You have a canal that is being built, that is being used once, with a boat coming in the plain in the suburb of the city of Macondo and lying there. That's exactly what we don't want, the Macondo diagnostic. What we want as a corridor is a full ecosystem. The basis of a corridor is not an infrastructure, it's a treaty. It's a treaty that can be bilateral, that can be multilateral, it can be a directive in Europe or in the ECOWAS. It's an agreement between states to create a global 360 degrees ecosystem. Within the ecosystem, you may have, indeed, digital infrastructure, submarine cables, satellite constellations, data systems, and those are keys. You're right, because in the same way that roads or railways were transporting goods, those new infrastructure are transporting data, and data are in the center of the new economy. It's the way to bridge the gap between areas that have been traditionally out of the centers of the economy with areas that are in the center of the economy. What I'd like to stress is that if nothing is done, those digital infrastructures, taking part of those corridors, will duplicate the same strengths and bottlenecks as the traditional corridors. If we do nothing, the rural areas will remain out of the global economy. Interland countries will remain out of the main commercial routes. And that's the reason why there is still, and I would say again, a place for state policies to contribute to the investment in fiber system, fiber optic, or satellite dishes.
Thank you very much for that. Now, Henrik, it's great that you stayed with us here to share your perspective from Standard Chartered, a bank very much at home in Asia, of course. And let me share some figures with the audience here, because we may not talk about it here in the West as much as we could or we should, but trade between emerging markets, particularly in Asia, okay, but accounts for nearly a quarter of all global trade, with South-South trade in particular and capital flows increasingly fueling global commerce. And we've got high growth corridors, of course, across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. So from your perspective, where do you see the most opportunities for trade and capital flows?
Thank you. Well, trade and corridors is very close to Standard Chartered's heart, because that's our background, and for many decades we've been one of the leading trade banks. And we saw the map earlier, which is similar to centuries-old trade routes, which Standard Chartered also banked. So corridors, and you have a bridge on the Infra Paris Week logo, is incredibly important to us. Now, we view corridors as a network, a framework, or a highway. Across anything can travel. That can be economic commerce, but it can also be talent, content, knowledge. I think specifically since the passing of COVID, we have seen quite big shifts in the supply chains and some of the trade routes. And that's why you've also seen the growth of the Global South, or EM countries trading with each other. Some of that started from challenges around supply chains or logistics, where there simply wasn't the capability at that point in time to continue normal transportation or commerce. But those have now clearly grown very significantly. Onshoring has become a big topic for most countries, including emerging market countries. You've seen the growth of domestic production in India as a huge area of focus. So we think that the EM growth amongst EM countries is going to continue, and that's going to cultivate new channels or corridors. There can be various forces that try to block or change corridors, but we're all inventive. Humans are very inventive individuals, and we'll come up with new corridors to trade and prosper amongst each other. So I think that's going to really be one of the interesting things. But to my colleague's point here, digital, I think, is going to be very interesting around these corridors, because digital may not actually have a framework around it. If you look at something like a stable coin, which is all of a sudden moving outside the system, that's something that could potentially start to challenge some of the decades and century-old corridors that we've been working in.
And Henrik, what about Europe in all of this? What's the opportunity here?
Well, I personally think Europe has an absolutely huge opportunity, and this is really Europe's time to grab that opportunity. So the investment needs that are needed in Europe are very significant. I think there's a huge interest from investors to deploy capital in Europe, whether it be traditional infrastructure or new infrastructure. We're aware that you can need new bridges. You know, if you look forward to a global warming, water, for example, could be something that needs to be invested in heavily. But I think Europe has the opportunity to take a real leadership stance in infrastructure. Europe has always been very strong in infrastructure. It's now a function of how much capital we can pull together, both from the public and private sector, and deliver into these initiatives. We have one open market that's ready and ripe for investment. There has been some change of the positioning around investment in some of the European countries, and this is a huge opportunity. And from what I see in the global investor space, a lot of global investors, including those in North America, are targeting Europe as their next big push around infrastructure investment.
That's a very upbeat message we need to hear from time to time indeed. So during the second round of our conversations, we're going to talk about how you build a corridor, the challenges and the roadmap, of course. So I'm going to start with you, of course, Gérard MESTRALLET. In terms of IMEC, what are the key challenges and the preconditions conditions for success in terms of infrastructure finance, for instance? What is it? Political stability, regulatory harmonization, local capacity? What are the key challenges for you?
First of all, there is a first condition, which is the peace, to be able to go from the Emirates crossing over the Saudi Arabia, then Jordan, and to Israel. We need peace, and so far that's not yet the case, even if there is a ceasefire. Not yet the peace. I will come back on the peace later on. Of course, the willingness of the countries to create this corridor, to harmonize the administrative procedures when some goods are crossing over the border. There is administrative procedure. By the way, between India and the Emirates, they have already progressing and created a virtual trade corridor between India and the Middle East. So it's done, and it will serve as a model for all the rest of the corridor. There is also the need for a market, because if there is no market, there is no use to create very important infrastructure. In the case of IMEC, a first evaluation has been done at around $500 billion US. So on a relatively wide period of time, nevertheless, it's a lot of money. This money will not come from the states. Most of it will come from the private sector, the corporations in the sector of the maritime transport, infrastructure, railways, cable companies, energy companies, because this corridor will be one of the major corridors for green hydrogen between the most important importer of green hydrogen, Europe, with its plans, and two among the most important producers and exporters of green hydrogen, India and Saudi Arabia with the NEOM project. So the needs, I mean the market has to be there. It's a precondition. That's why, by the way, we have launched at the French level, but now collectively, studies not only to analyze the existing infrastructure, their capacities, their efficiency, but also market studies to know what will be the demand for transport of goods, of containers in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, but also for the transport of energy, power, green power, because Europe will need additional green power. Not France, but other countries like Germany will need to import energy. And also the demand for data transmission and data for all the future data centers, for example. So those are conditions. It will take time, but you know, the corridor, which is a commercial link between India and Europe, have been existing for millenniaries. And so we are improving, we are accelerating. And today there are already some transport, some connections, some trade between those three continents. The objective is to create more links, to create physical links, but also political links and solidarity through the connectivity.
That's a very valid point indeed. Thank you very much for that. Now, Rémy, earlier you alluded to the fact that one of the key challenges here is to build a solid regulatory framework and to have strong policy in place for those corridors to succeed and to build those digital superhighways. I won't mention the word corridor, of course, but those superhighways, maybe new digital Silk Roads. So can you expand on this a little bit and maybe tell us about your work and the work international law firms are conducting to help countries design resilient frameworks that can attract long-term investment?
Yeah, well, it's a long process, but to be short, I would say there are three main pillars. The first one is certainly regulatory. And regulatory means first at the national level. Before entering into a negotiation for the creation of a new corridor, each state has to do its own homework and make sure that national regulations applicable to each of the commercial sectors or industrial sectors concerned by the corridor are set up to the best standards. Second, still in the regulatory pillar, putting in place, drafting, negotiating a treaty that can take multiple forms, but definitely a treaty that can address all of the topics of the project, the corridor project. So it deals with, of course, tariffs, but not only tariffs, connectivity, security in many aspects, industry, agriculture, processing, and so on. That's for the first main pillar on regulation. Second, there's a need to have a sort of a roadmap. You don't start a negotiation like that. You start to have a strategic plan, and based on the strategic plan, an agenda, and based on agenda, the sequencing of the reforms that have to take place in each of the countries. This is necessary to attack the second pillar, which is transactional. You need to put in place a transaction, or multiple transactions, taking the form of PPPs, of concessions, to have the infrastructures being built and processed. And so this deals with, of course, having a sort of PPP unit, starting the drafting of the documents, having a procurement process that is transparent, that is objective. And the fact, I mean, having an international law firm or having international advisors, financial advisors, technical, economic advisors, will grant the whole process with, I think, additional respectability and provide by its own presence added value to the process. And then third, you need to have things going on the ground. So there's a part of it which is project management. We are not here just to have nice documents, we are here to have projects being built on the ground. And this is, in many countries, the most difficult part.
I can see Henrik nodding a lot here. You are in agreement with this, of course. If you could maybe follow up on what Rémy shared with us, but also address the question of what innovative financial instruments or maybe blended finance mechanisms are possible or are available to support corridor projects, especially in emerging countries.
I very much agree with your comments, but I also think specifically when it comes to data and digital, my own personal view is increasingly each country will build their own infrastructure around that because they will want to own and have sovereignty in some respect of the data and the digital channels. And that's one reason why we're seeing such an explosive growth going on in the background. Now, if you believe in AI, which probably the majority in the room do, if you believe there's potentially a new industrial renaissance coming, power is going to be the absolute key here. Those countries with power are going to be driving knowledge because AI is going to lead to knowledge. And if you own power, you're going to move in quicker on the knowledge highway. And that is going to be a really strong differentiator. So with that, as a bank, we're very focused in terms of the digital space and how we can provide financing around this. I think, as mentioned previously, the areas that are growing the most are securitization. So in many of the data center projects today, you'll start with a brownfield site, and you've seen what the likes of Meta have done and Oracle. You know, some of these financings are $40 billion for data center. 1 or 2 data centers, not multiple data centers. That's the scale of the project. They'll start as a bank finance project, or they'll bring in private credit, but then they'll also go into the ABS markets, termed out into the bond markets. There's many different things you can do now in terms of making sure that each person or investor has the appropriate risk for their risk tolerance and balance sheets. So the banks will have the senior part of the capital structure. Those who are willing to take more risk will have the junior part of the capital structure. And this has become a really important development. And we should look back that Europe has been a leader in securitization for 3 decades. Europe very much has this technology. Europe is a leader in insurance. Some of the world's largest insurance companies are in Europe. We have ample capacity for reinsurance and other opportunities to be a leader in this space. So I think there's a lot of really positive things coming together. And both sides of the corridor. We talk about India. India has obviously been on a very strong growth rate. They've been investing in renewables. We touched upon that earlier. They've been putting data centers in place, ports. India has invested very aggressively in its infrastructure to support its growth. And investing in infrastructure, whether it be data or the surrounding piece, is absolutely crucial, I think, in the coming decade.
We need to wrap up this conversation, unfortunately, and very frustratingly. We only have a couple of minutes left. I've just bought more time here. It's difficult not to have a conversation when you're talking about corridors, about globalization, because there's been much talk lately about reverse of or deglobalization. Of course, shipping data and other data may not quite agree with that view. But we know that the trade of goods has decreased since 2008 and the financial crisis, that we had supply chain disruption during COVID, etc. So I want to get your view here on how corridors form part of this, globalization picture. And I'm going to start with you, Henrik, because there's also this notion that corridors should empower local, or at least national, regional communities too. So are we switching from globalization to localization?
No, I don't think so. I think nothing just progresses on a linear trend. So we are in a period now where there's a different cadence on globalization. There are different chains moving and there are different corridors opening up. But globalization is going to continue. It may happen at a different pace. Maybe it's going to be slightly slower in the coming years. But once infrastructure is put in place and other opportunities arise and new technologies, globalization will come back. Globalization has been a key driver of economic growth and society's prosperity. So I don't think that's changing. We're just seeing a short-term shift.
Rémy.
Yeah, well, I don't think that globalization has slowed down in the digital economy. It may have slowed down for goods, but certainly not for data. As my colleague has mentioned, there is a need, of course, to localize data, and including for sovereign reasons. But even though there are now some international treaties to limit the localization of data, what I think is that we are at the very beginning of a sort of re-globalization, where corridors can serve either as walls or as opportunities. If you take the example of the Dar el Mandeb Strait, it's this piece of sea between Djibouti and Yemen. It's a crucial part of commercial routes around the world. This has been, for decades, a path of commerce. It has now become a wall because of the war in Yemen that stops the communication of ships and stops the rollout of a very big international cable system called CME 6. That's typically the sort of corridor that you need to preserve to continue in this globalization. So there are opportunities. Those corridors definitely are a chance for a new type of development, but there are also challenges due by the existence of those corridors that in a way can exclude other countries.
Thank you very much. Gérard, MESTRALLET, to conclude with corridors as a way to boost, of course, global trade, but also as tools for peace and people's empowerment.
Yes, that's the case for IMEC. We consider that IMEC should be the project of the day after. We don't see this corridor as a collection of passive infrastructures. some rails, some pipes, some ships. It has to irrigate the hinterland with prosperity, jobs, and growth. And the hinterland of Haifa is composed of the Israel, South Lebanon, the western part of Syria, Jordan, and Palestine. And so in a peace plan should include IMEC as a priority. And this is what Europe wants, and which is already discussed between local NGOs composing of Palestinians, Israelis, and Jordanians. And so I see IMEC as a peace project.
Thank you so very much to all our wonderful guests here this afternoon for a fascinating discussion indeed. Gérard MESTRALLET, Rémy FEKETE, and Henrik RABER. Thank you so very much. Thank you.